welcome Dr. Kate Weisshaar, who is an assistant professor of sociology at UNC Chapel Hill. Her research focuses on gender, family, and inequality, especially when it comes to outcomes such as hiring and promotions. She draws primarily on quantitative methods such as experimental and family demography to study these issues, but she's also been doing some interviews, as I just learned. One of my favorite pieces of Kate's research is her experimental study examining whether a gap in your resume due to caregiving or due to unemployment is a bigger liability when trying to get hired again. It's due to caregiving, just to kind of give that answer right there. She's published in top sociology journals such as the American Sociological Review and Social Forces. Her talk today is titled An Imperfect Match, Gender and Racial Discrimination in Hiring Across Skill Matching. Thanks so much for being with us today, Kate.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and hope you all are staying warm wherever you are. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm gonna try to do it this way. Okay, can you all see that okay? Okay, perfect. Sorry, 1 second. Just trying to minimize the window so I can see my notes. Okay, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And what I'm going to share with you is a work in progress. So this is very much in the works and kind of fresh. And I would love to hear your questions and comments at the end because it's a really good time for us to hear all of those. And I wanted to mention from the beginning that this is a collaborative project with Koji Chavez, who's at Indiana University, and then with my grad student at UNC, Tanya Cabello-Hutt. And so the title is An Imperfect Match, Gender and Racial Discrimination in Hiring Across Skill Matching. So to jump right in, I wanted to start by giving a quick overview of gender and race at the hiring interface in the US labor market. And so in the past 2 decades, these audit and correspondence studies in which researchers experimentally design fictitious resumes to submit to real job openings have become kind of the gold standard for detecting discrimination in the hiring screening outcomes. And there's been an explosion of these types of studies in recent years, in large part because of the ability to field these studies online through online job applications. And a lot of this body of research documents that racial and gender discrimination in hiring screening decisions remains a feature of the modern US labor market. And there's a substantial body of evidence about patterns of gender and racial discrimination across occupations. So for example, Jill Yavorsky shows in a 2019 paper that gender discrimination against white women occurs only in particular occupational settings. For example, in more manual occupational settings, and it's also dependent on the gender composition of the occupation. But only recently has attention turned to exploring variation within occupations. And some recent work has shown, for example, that discrimination against mothers is exacerbated in jobs that require increased work hours or travel. This is by Patrick Ishizuka. And others, including Yavorsky, have looked at how gender discrimination varies according to how masculine or feminine the job requirements are. So in this project, we are building on some of these within occupation studies, and we argue that skill matching is a potentially important within occupation process that likely relates to discrimination. And so why might skill matching be important? Well, first of all, it's widely understood by both employers and scholars that hiring decisions are occurring at this interface of the job's requirements and applicants' ability to fulfill those requirements. And so in this way, hiring is conceived of theoretically as a matching process in which both the applicants and the employers seek a match according to skills and abilities. And also, it's important to note that matching or mismatching happens frequently in the labor market. There's a lot of mismatch in the labor market, and this mismatch is often associated with gender and race in some interesting ways. So for example, few job applicants are actually a perfect match to a position that they applied to. And there's some evidence that women and racial and ethnic minorities might be less likely than white men to apply to jobs for which they feel they're underqualified for. And Black applicants similarly cast a wider net than white applicants when job searching. So there's kind of these interesting dynamics according to gender and race about how applicants are deciding to apply to jobs, but we don't really know from the other side of things whether matching or mismatching on requirements for a job relates to discrimination. So our theoretical understanding of the relationship between matching and mismatching and discrimination is limited. And you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, a couple of examples from the popular media, and this kind of demonstrates that, people are being encouraged to apply to a wide range of jobs, including those that they're underqualified for. And also, popularly, there's this conception that qualification or matching is related to gender and race. So the research questions for today are, what is the relationship between job applicants match or mismatch to required skills and the level of gender and racial discrimination at the hiring interface? Which types of skill matching affect discrimination levels? And then how does skill matching vary by lateral versus upward job level attempts? So by this, I mean, when people are applying to a job where they are currently holding that exact job level. So if you are, for example, well, I'll show you, we'll be talking about accountants today, but if you are a senior accountant applying to a senior accountant position compared to if you are a senior accountant, you're applying to a management position. So that would be an upward job level attempt. And I'm mostly going to talk about the matching parts of these research questions today, but I'll just briefly touch on expectations and the findings by job level too. So for the study, we're drawing on matching theory, which again explains that hiring is this result of a matching process by which applicants select into jobs and employers select applicants that best meet the requirements for the job. And there are motivations on both sides to choose the highest match. That, this makes a lot of sense. For example, for applicants, it would be a waste of time to apply to a job that you're an extremely poor fit for and you couldn't reasonably complete the tasks. And for employers, there is an acute need to hire someone who can actually do the work and be able to fulfill the requirements of the job, but also someone who will fit in well with the expectations at the company. And so sociologists have described matching according to human, social, and cultural capital, focusing on highly skilled occupations. And in existing empirical studies, matching is typically applied to education, credentials, and cultural fit, again, focusing on these elite occupations. And here we are going to be focusing on within the human capital domain, focusing on skills. So we argue that within that human capital domain, matching on skills is an important but understudied phenomenon. So, what do we mean by matching and mismatching on skills? This is just a hypothetical figure that shows that a perfect match, which is on the left-hand side, when an applicant meets exactly all of the position's job demands. And this, doesn't typically happen. What is much more common is a situation on the right-hand side of the graph where there is a mismatch of the applicant attributes and job demands. So in this particular example, the applicant matches on some of the job demands and then has additional skills that are not required for the job. So that is one type of mismatch. And this type of mismatch is very common in the labor market. And so even though discrimination theories haven't been well integrated with matching theories, we think that there are multiple reasons to expect that discrimination by gender and race will decrease in hiring screening decisions as skill match increases. Why might this be the case? This idea comes from both economics and social psychology, and it has to do with the idea that employers, when they're reviewing job applications, when they're looking at resumes, there's some uncertainty about applicants' abilities, and so they have to make inferences about whether applicants have certain attributes. So economists, in line with statistical discrimination theories, might say that employers are making rational inferences about group level skill distributions to kind of fill in the gaps. You only have limited information on a resume, and so you have to kind of fill in missing information with assumptions about a group that this applicant belongs to. So this would mean that if applicants match increasingly on skills, then employers have less need to fill in those gaps with assumptions based on, for example, gender and race. And in a related line of research, social psychologists have found that with ample information about someone, a person is treated less as a representative member of their racial and gender group and more as an individual. And so in these situations with rich, clear, relevant information, evaluators are less likely to rely on gender and racial stereotypes. And so we think that, given that matching on skills is so important for employers, and they really need to find someone who can actually, do the job and has the skills that are required, that matching on skills could be one type of clear, relevant information that could then potentially reduce employers' reliance on gender and racial stereotypes. So our overall prediction then is that gender and racial discrimination will decrease as the level of skill match increases. Okay, and so how do we think that matching relates to specific stereotypes by gender and race? We expect that employers will draw on salient gender and racial stereotypes when considering applicants, and especially draw on these stereotypes when they are mismatched to the job. So salient gender stereotypes in the literature that have been established relate to women's lower competence, commitment, leadership, and assertiveness compared to men. Racial stereotypes include Black workers' relatively lower perceived competence, personal responsibility, commitment, work ethic, and social skills compared to white workers. And importantly, Black women who are at the intersection of gender and racial stereotypes, they may face unique combinations of stereotypes. Specifically, we draw from theories of intersectional prototypicality, which suggests that white men and Black men are prototypical of racial stereotypes, and white men and white women are prototypical of gender stereotypes. So Black women may face a different set of stereotypes than either Black men or white women, or in some cases, they might be able to escape certain stereotypes. So for example, while Black men and white women are perceived to be less committed to work than white men, Black women may not face this commitment stereotype, but they might face additional stereotypes instead. But overall, since these widely held gender and racial stereotypes default to assume shortcomings, when an employer views a job applicant who does not meet the requirements for the job, we think that this will confirm their stereotypical expectations. And when they view a job applicant who is clearly matching on the job requirements, we think that this will kind of be incongruent with the stereotypes and then could alter perceptions of applicants. So we would expect that stereotypes are most salient when applicants do not meet the job requirements, and then they would be muted or reduced when the applicants do match on job requirements. Okay, so we conducted a survey experiment to kind of confirm this idea that matching reduces stereotyping, but that gender and racial stereotypes emerge when applicants do not meet job requirements. And I'm going to give you just a quick summary of those results. And I'm happy to go into more details of that study in the Q&A. So in January 2020, we fielded a survey experiment and essentially told respondents that you're going to evaluate job applicants, and some people were told these applicants did not meet all of the requirements, and some people were told that applicants did meet all of the requirements. And our findings were that when told that the applicants did not meet all of the requirements when they were unmatched on job requirements, we found that Black men were rated lower than white men on measures of capability, commitment, leadership, and responsibility. That white women were rated lower than white men on measures of commitment and assertiveness. And we did not find any differences for Black women. They were rated similarly to white men on each dimension. But importantly, when respondents were told that these job applicants matched on all of the job requirements, we found no evidence of gender and racial stereotyping. All of the groups were rated similarly to white men. So the takeaways from this experiment are that, matching potentially reduces or eliminates stereotyped evaluations. And we also found, in line with these theories about prototypicality and intersections of gender and race, that Black women did not face heightened stereotypes when unmatched, whereas Black men and white women did. So we're kind of considering that initial experiment as a proof of concept that applicants who did not meet job requirements face heightened gender and racial stereotyping, and applicants who do face less stereotyping. But the main part of the talk is going to focus on a theoretical and an empirical extension of this finding. So extending our understanding of matching in two ways. First, whether the type of skill match moderates the relationship between matching and racial and gender discrimination. And second, whether the effect of skill matching differs by job level for lateral versus upward job attempts. Okay, so overall, in terms of types of skill matches, we note a distinction between three different types. The first are technical skills, and these are, specific techniques and skills that are related to the core features of the job. And these are learned or acquired, right? So you can, you could have learned these in school, you could have learned these in a prior job, or you could be taught these types of skills in your new job. Second, we'll be looking at soft skills, and these can be considered personality or social characteristics. And even though as sociologists, we know that soft skills can be learned, in general, people tend to consider soft skills to be more innate or difficult to change. So, a trait of your personality that might be less easy to change. And then finally, we'll also be looking at experience as a type of skill match. Thinking about when employers require 5 years of experience or 8 years of experience for a job. What does experience represent? It represents a deep knowledge of the occupation, also thinking about socialization around the occupational norms. And we think it also reflects commitment, right? So if you've been in an occupation for a long time, then that represents that you're kind of committed to this line of work. And experience is acquired, slowly over time. And how do we think that employer bias might relate to the different types of skills? We think that employers could be more focused on these deep trait matches of applicants compared to learnable skills, since the latter can be taught and the former cannot. So here we would think that matching reduces discrimination more dramatically when matching is on experience and soft skills compared to technical skills. But we also think that there's a plausible alternative hypothesis, and this relates to the fact that technical skills are really in demand. They're also very easy to infer from a resume, right? So maybe less easy than some of these soft skills. And so it's possible that matching on technical skills could more dramatically reduce discrimination than matching by soft skills or experience. And in terms of predictions by job level, we don't go into the study with strong expectations about how the effects of skills might differ by job level, but we do expect there could be some variation. For example, experience could be more important for applications to manager positions, upwardly mobile applications, compared to lateral moves. And this is because, managers who are overseeing a team, they need to have the professional socialization and the deep knowledge to adequately train and supervise team members. But again, we're not going in with strong predictions here. We are just kind of exploring this empirically. So I'm going to revisit this in the results. Okay, so getting into the data and methods and starting with the study design overall. So we developed a set of fictitious applicant resumes, which signaled gender and race, and included randomized skills of the three types that I just mentioned. We then scraped online job openings from a large job listing site across the 50 most populated US cities. And of that population of job listings across these cities, we randomly sampled ones to use in our application process. And then we submitted job applications to these sample job openings. We saved the job posting text for each application for later analysis. And then we coded the skills on the applicant resumes and on the job listings to create these skill matching measures. So what do our data look like? This is from an audit or correspondence study of employers, and we had about 6,700 fictitious job applications that were sent online to real mid-level accountant positions from basically the full year of 2019. And generally, we submitted 2 applications per job. Everything is randomly assigned to the job opening. All of the fictitious applicants were senior accountants. So all of the applicants had the same job level. That did not vary. But applicants were either applying to lateral jobs, to other senior accountant positions, or to higher level jobs, which are manager accountant positions. And the fictitious applicants were randomly assigned a perceived gender. We had men and women, and a perceived race. And we have applicants who are Black and white, and this is signaled by the name. And I'm happy to talk more about the names in the Q&A as well, because I know there's been a lot of recent methodological work on name choice and what that signals. So why study accountants? Well, we think that accountants are a highly skilled occupation with a relatively clear job hierarchy. So it does allow us to tap into this job level effect and clear career path. Accountants are also both technically and socially oriented, which is important to be able to distinguish the effects of technical skills compared to social skills. So, they have to, do taxes and these kind of technical tasks, but also work on a team and also work with clients. And accountants are roughly equal in gender composition. There's actually about 60% women, so they skew a little bit toward women, which reduces a little bit at the upper job levels. But of course, we don't think that these processes necessarily generalize to other occupations. So we are thinking about this occupation as a case study, thinking about how focusing on one occupation helps to identify important skills and theories that can then be tested in other contexts in future research. Okay, so in terms of developing the resumes, we initially started by drawing examples from 50 resumes available online, and we identified common skills, language, and companies for senior accountant applicants. And then we adjusted a little bit after we had analyzed some of the online job listings and some of the job demands that were listed there. Our job applicants are highly educated, and they went to fairly elite private schools in the US, and they all have a CPA certification. The reason for this, and again, I'm happy to talk more about this, is that we wanted to kind of hold constant these credentials and any concerns about level of education, and just look at the human capital dimension of skills. But I think that there are interesting ideas for how to explore different levels of education in future research. And in terms of their work experience, they had a big 5 accounting firm in the US and a typical career progression. And then the fictitious applicants were randomly assigned between 4 and 6 years of experience, and also had multiple general accounting and specialized technical skills. And we also randomized the number and types of soft skills on the resumes as well. Okay, so that's the applicant side of things. What does the job posting side of things look like? Here is an example of a job posting. You probably can barely read this, but basically, this job is requiring 3 years of experience, a CPA, which all of our applicants have, strong technical accounting skills, and they have a couple of specific technical skills that they list, strong attention to detail, so that would be a soft skill. And so basically, for all of the job postings that we have, we are, attempted to find all of the skills in these job postings to be able to analyze. And so how did we do that? Well, we used an iterative combination of some computational text analysis techniques to find the skills and hand coding. So we collected the HTML files for each of the job listings in our sample with the text associated with them, and an additional sample from those larger set of scraped jobs. So our total N was about 27,000. We then used n-gram tokenization techniques to find the distribution of words and phrases that were 1 to 7 words long in the text of the job listings and sorted those by how commonly they occurred. And then we hand coded the n-grams down to 20 occurrences. So if a word or a phrase occurred less than 20 times out of those 27,000, we might not have gotten it, but we feel pretty comfortable that we got most of them. And we repeated this process multiple times. So each time we removed any skills we'd already identified and any skills we identified as non-skills until we kind of reached a saturation of skills and we weren't finding any new skills in the n-grams. And then, we organized all these skills into a matrix of 715 unique skill categories, and we combined some of the same, underlying phrases that represent the same skill. For example, subledger, subsidiary ledger, those are the same thing. And for user experience, we used a combination of hand coding and text analysis and coded the minimum required years of experience for a job. So with these skills that we identified in the job listings, we developed 3 types of skills that align with what I mentioned earlier. So technical and accounting skills, some examples there are QuickBooks, SAP, variance analysis, month-end close statements. Soft skills, which could be leadership, analytical skills, oral communication, commitment, among many others. And experience is measured as years of experience. Okay, and so what are our measures in the audit study? The dependent variable is receiving a callback, and this was recorded when an employer requested an interview. We did exclude automated responses that were sent to all applicants and didn't seem to really reflect an interview request. And in terms of our measures to assess skill match, we have the number of matching accounting and technical skills. And here we assume that our applicants do match on all of the very basic skills, even if it's not explicitly measured or explicitly mentioned on the resume. So for example, if they require email abilities or Microsoft Word, something like that, that might not be listed on the resume, but it's reasonably certain that our applicants have those skills. But this actually doesn't affect results very much at all. We also look at the number of matching soft skills, and then we create a measure of relative experience, which is applicant years minus required years. So a measure of 0 on this relative years of experience would be a perfect match on experience. A measure that is positive means that an applicant is overqualified, they have more experience than is required, and negative means that they have less experience than is required. Okay, and here are some of the descriptive statistics for our skill and qualification measures. I'm just going to breeze through this in the interest of time, but most jobs require plenty of accounting and technical skills, about 25, some soft skills, and about 4 years of experience on average. And in terms of our matching of our applicants, they match on about 17 of those accounting technical skills, a little more than 3 soft skills, and on average are a little bit overqualified in terms of the number of years of experience they have compared to what's required. Okay, and then in terms of models and variables, so we are running logistic regression models that predicting receiving a callback with applicants' gender and race, and the matching measure interacted. And we do test squared terms as well, and I'll show you one set of results that has that term in there. There's also an interaction with the job level, and models are clustered by job because we generally submitted 2 applications per job. We have a bunch of control measures that don't affect results much at all, that include the region, the applicant order, so whether the first applicant or the second, and the applicant's major and university. And what I'll show you are graphs with predicted probabilities across the skill measures. And first I'll show you the callback rates for all of the groups, and then I'll show you the difference in callback rates compared to white men, which is just a more direct way of looking at discrimination or the gap compared to white men. Okay, so what do the results look like? So first, here are the overall callback rates by gender, race, and job level. So the left-hand panel are the lateral job applicants, or senior accountant job applicants applying to senior accountant positions. And the right-hand side are the upwardly mobile attempts at a higher job level for senior accountants applying to manager accountant positions. So on the left-hand side of the panel, you can see that both Black men and Black women face lower callbacks compared to white men. And white women have slightly lower callbacks than white men, but pretty similar. They're not statistically different. And for example, Black men have callback rates of about 12.3% and Black women about 14% compared to white men who have callback rates of about 17.4%. And then on the right-hand side of the panel, these are the upwardly mobile job attempts. And here you can see that, first of all, the callback rates are lower overall than the lateral moves, which makes sense because this is an upwardly mobile attempt. And here we still see racial discrimination for both Black men and women, but we also find that white women experience a significant penalty in the upward job applications as well. So the main difference across job level is both in the average callback being reduced for the upward mobile attempts, but also the white woman penalty is not significant for the lateral moves and becomes statistically significant and larger for the upwardly mobile attempts. Okay, so next I'm going to show you the results of the skill matching analysis. And for the first two ones, I'll show you first the combined results for both job levels, and then really quickly show you the separate results for the job levels, because I know there's a lot of graphs to look at. But for the first two skill measures for accounting and technical skills and for soft skills, there's no significant difference by job level, so they kind of operate in the same way. So this graph shows you the predicted callback rates for both job levels combined across the number of matching skills. So here 10 to 25. And so what we're seeing is that there's not very much happening here, right? So there's not a clear association with the number of matching technical and accounting skills compared to callback rates. Maybe there's a slight increase for Black men, but it's not statistically significant. And there's not really a pattern that is reducing or changing the level of discrimination. And I should have mentioned that these graphs are showing 95% confidence intervals. So to illustrate how this looks for the two different job levels, here are the lateral jobs on the left and the upwardly mobile jobs on the right. And these graphs are showing the difference in callback rates compared to white men. So it's the white men's callbacks minus the group's callbacks. Sorry, the other way around. So a negative value means you had a lower callback rate than men. And so you can see that even though there are differences across the two types of jobs in terms of the average level of callback for each group, it's still relatively flat. Like this skill measure is not, operating differently across the two types of jobs. So for example, white women are doing better overall for the senior accountants, but they still have a pretty flat relationship between matching accounting and Okay, so here's the soft skill match, and here is where a lot of the action is. So matching on soft skills, we find dramatically increases callbacks for women and significantly increases callbacks for Black men. And so as a result, reduces the amount of discrimination. And you can see that there's not that much happening for white men. So white men who match on 0 soft skills have similar callbacks to those who match on many soft skills. And what we find is actually that for women, matching on a high number of soft skills actually not only reduces discrimination, but for white women kind of reverses discrimination such that they actually have higher callbacks than white men. So for example, matching on one soft skill, white men have callback rates of about 1.5 to 1.9 times the rate of each other group. And when matching on 7 soft skills toward the higher end, these effects become non-significant for Black men, and white women actually have higher callbacks, so about 22% higher callback rates than white men. And so what does this look like broken down by job level? You can see there's a little bit of variation. These differences by job level are not statistically significant, but white women seem to particularly benefit from matching on soft skills for the lateral moves, maybe a little bit less so for Black women, but again, the effects are not statistically significant. And the overall pattern that women benefit on matching on soft skills slightly more than Black men do. It has a higher slope effect for women is holding across both of these job levels. Okay, turning to the experience results, I'm going to show them separately for each job level since they're pretty different. So starting with the lateral moves, senior accountants applying to senior accountant job openings. So on this graph, as a reminder, the left-hand side of within each panel, the negative values are when applicants are underqualified, so they do not match on the job, the required experience. When we're at 0, they perfectly match, and when they are positive values, they are overqualified, or they go beyond the required experience. So we find that when applicants are underqualified or they don't match on required experience, there is evidence of gender and racial discrimination. So for example, at 3 years underqualified, white men have about 2.4 times the callbacks of both Black men and white women, and they do have similar callbacks to Black women. Approaching 0, which is the perfect match on experience, we find that discrimination decreases. Here, white men have about 1.2 times the callbacks of Black men, and about equal callbacks for both white and Black women. And then moving to the right-hand side of the graph, which are cases of overqualification, we do see some evidence of discrimination widening again as we get further away from the perfect match. So for example, at 3 years overqualified, white men have about 1.9 times the callbacks of Black men and about 1.4 times the callback rates of Black women. So overall, we're finding that as applicants approach exact experience required, there's less discrimination. This is in part due to and as they move beyond, there is increased discrimination, in part due to white men having increased callbacks, and in part due to this dip in callbacks that we see for both white women and Black men as they become overqualified. But it's also important to note that the findings for Black women look really different than they do for Black men and white women. So we really don't find that Black women have a lot of variation in callbacks across their levels of matching on experience. And I'll talk about what I think that might mean in a little bit. Okay, turning to the manager job, so these upwardly mobile job attempts, the experience matchings look quite different. So first, you'll notice that there's really not much variation in callbacks for Black men and women and white women across relative experience, but there is significant variation for white men. So as they increase in matching or exceeding the required experience, they are increasingly likely to get a callback for a manager job. So what do we think this means? Why is it different from the senior level? We think it illustrates 2 processes. So first, it shows that there are limits to white men's advantage in callbacks when being mismatched. So looking at that left-hand side of the graph, when white men applicants are low on required experience and they're applying to this higher level position, they have really low callbacks. This makes sense because people want to hire experienced applicants for manager positions. So basically the idea is that being a white man doesn't overcome lack of experience when applying to that higher level job. But second, in contrast to our previous results, which show that matching on experience decreases discrimination for lateral moves, experience matching does not decrease discrimination similarly for upwardly mobile job attempts. We think this could be related to potentially some gender and racial backlash for the kind of agentic and power-seeking behavior of seeking a higher level job. Or again, it could go back to employers' concerns about who has the deep knowledge and socialization for the position, and matching an experience is just not enough to overcome some of the biased gender and racial assumptions for upward job seeking. And this graph just shows the same pattern of results for the two job levels side by side. Again, showing that approaching 0, we see decreased discrimination, especially for Black men, and on the lateral moves, and just widening discrimination as you get higher in terms of the meeting or exceeding required experience on the right-hand side for the manager jobs. Okay, so to give a quick summary of the audit results, we think that these generally align with the prediction that deep skills, these soft skills and experience, more dramatically reduce discrimination compared to technical skills. And this is evidenced by the little variation in callbacks and discrimination by matching across accounting and technical skills. And the finding that increased matching on soft skills reduces discrimination and even reverses discrimination for women applicants, particularly white women. And for lateral job moves, matching on experience decreases discrimination as well. But we do find that experience matching has a really different effect by job level. So for these upward job attempts, white men benefit from matching or exceeding required experience, but it's really unrelated to Black men's and Black and white women's callbacks. And how do our findings relate to the intersection of gender and race? Well, first, we find that matching on soft skills seems to matter most strongly for Black and white women, and to a lesser extent for Black men. But we also find that Black women face these unique patterns of discrimination compared to Black men and white women. So for example, this different pattern for the lateral moves of experience, we think it might indicate that employer concerns regarding deep ability and commitment may be more salient for Black men and white women, and less for Black women, again, for the lateral job moves. And this could relate to, Black women's long history of working, and, so there are less of those concerns around commitment and staying in the occupation for Black women specifically. Okay, so some conclusions from this project. We think that the concept of matching is foundational to theories of hiring, but its relationship to discrimination is really under-theorized. And so we're trying to extend matching theory to consider these different types of match and mismatch, and also thinking about variation by the applicant and position matching, and then adding a little bit of nuance to our understandings of intersections of race and gender in hiring biases. But like I mentioned, this is an ongoing project, and there are a lot of next steps that we hope to pursue, some of which we hope to pursue ourselves, and others, hopefully other people will take up. So one important next step we think is to examine more extreme bounds of matching and mismatching, so including overqualification. We kind of had a glimpse of how overqualification on experience could lead to increased discrimination, but we think it's important to study that in other dimensions as well. Thinking about, extending to different racial and ethnic groups beyond the Black and white binary is important, considering there are very different stereotypes associated with different racial and ethnic groups. And then we think it would be really important to study matching beyond initial hiring screening decisions. So thinking about later stages of hiring and the interview process, and also in other employment decisions like promotion. And finally, exploring other occupations and job levels. And this is one that we are currently working on. So like I mentioned earlier, accountants, they're unique in that they are kind of balanced in terms of gender. They have these technical and social skills that they draw on. But I think it would be really interesting to study this for occupations that are more technically skewed or more gender unbalanced. So we are currently doing a study with software engineers and financial analysts. And so those, are more male dominated than accountants, but still have some of those technical features of the job as well. And the other part of this is studying differences by job level. So right now with this study, we're not able to distinguish whether those differences in the manager versus senior accountant effects are because the manager jobs are different. Like, is it something about the manager job, or is it something about that upward job attempt, right? So we don't have an equivalent comparison of managers applying to manager positions. So we can't really tease apart whether it's the management job itself or is it the attempt at a higher status job that is causing these differences. And so that is something that we're exploring in our ongoing project as well. Okay, and since this is the methodology series, I wanted to mention some future methodological ideas for studying skills. The first is linking to other data sets, and one that I'm going to mention specifically is Burning Glass Technologies, and they have these skill and job posting data that are really fascinating. So in case you haven't heard of them, this is a company called Burning Glass Technologies, and they are in Boston. And essentially what they have done is they scrape the web for, across many, many different sites. I think they said 70,000 or something different sites. And they think they have nearly the universe of online job listing data. So, almost all job listings that are available online, they have found. And what they do is they, save the job text, and they have analyzed it by, what skills are there, but then they're also able to categorize these skills in terms of what skills tend to be clustered together, what skills are growing in demand, what skills are associated with higher salaries, and does that change depending on the location. So there are a lot of benefits to having these additional, measures of, how to think about skills. Some of the challenges associated with these data are linking job listings. So for example, from our audit study, linking to Burning Glass is actually quite challenging because, slight variations in company name, and job title, and there's, millions of jobs to try to match on. So it's important to get that job match correct. And then second, because this is a private company and their data are proprietary, we have all these interesting measures, but we don't really know how to validate them. We don't have any information about how did they come up with the cluster or the growth measure. There's also a lot of other computational text analysis techniques that I think could be very promising, including word-to-vec and topic modeling. And some people have studied skills using these measures. Some of the benefits being that it's, relatively fast and easier to code large data sets without doing this back and forth hand coding. Challenges, again, distinguishing skills from other common text in job listings, like in company descriptions. Okay, so to wrap up, what are some of the theoretical, methodological, and practical implications of the study? We hope that we are recognizing processes beyond kind of employer rationality and these consciously applied stereotypes to extend our understanding of discrimination. Methodologically, we think there is use in thinking about the benefits of randomization of applicant attributes. So these randomized skills beyond just having one resume template and only randomizing the name of the applicant. And then practically, we think that employers could reduce discrimination somewhat by, blindly screening applicants and first labeling them as meeting requirements or not. And that could reduce the impact of gender and racial stereotypes. And in terms of broader implications, we are hoping to advance our understanding of how these demand-side processes limit women's and Black applicants' abilities to secure career advancements, which complements some of the supply side research that I mentioned at the beginning. And, even though we have some nuance in the levels of gender and racial discrimination we find, we do show that discrimination remains a feature of our modern labor markets. And we think that our findings also have implications for who can secure jobs when they're mismatched on skills, which could be important, for example, now during the pandemic, when there's not very many jobs available. And so people might be more likely to mismatch on skills when they're applying to a job. So this could be important to think about during times of economic instability. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to hear your questions and comments, and I'm really happy to be here and to have you listening to the talk. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that, Kate. What I'll do now is I have a bunch of questions myself, but I won't ask them yet. I'll just wait to see whether we have some questions from the audience instead.
Perfect, yeah.
And for the audience, you should feel free to just unmute yourself and ask, or you can post it in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function to ask if you prefer.
I wonder if I can sneak in a question before I run to method surgery in 5 minutes.
Go right ahead.
Fascinating talk, really, really exceptional results. And as you said, that add a lot of nuance to problems that often are discussed with some lack of it. I was wondering, however, to what extent you're considering the characteristics of the job market itself. So you're interpreting these results as if there's this fixed background, in a sense, randomized competitors to these positions, but wouldn't how many people in particular demographics apply to the job make a difference on the probabilities regardless of what you're adding to the CVs? So that's right.
Yeah, I think that, so thinking about characteristics of the job market and the applicant pool specifically, I think that's a really interesting question. And in my previous audit study that Aaliyah mentioned at the beginning, looking at employment history, I did do some trying to look at whether there's variation across local labor markets and thinking about the applicant pool. It's hard to get clear data on actual applicants and who's applying to what, but I think it's important to think about how there could be variation across different, for example, local contexts. In terms of how does the labor market characteristic reflect in these results, I think you're absolutely right that we're not really considering that in a direct way in this, and we're hoping that randomization and the large sample size kind of accounts for, or mitigates concerns about a lot of that. But I think that it would be really interesting to look at whether, for example, the gender and racial breakdown of the labor supply in a location might affect these processes. And the kind of the way that we think about this is thinking about job applications and hiring decisions in terms of a queuing process. So if employers have 100 resumes, they potentially, theoretically, this doesn't actually happen, rank them 1 to 100. And so then the question is whether race and gender are being used in that ranking sorting initial stage. And so whether there are a lot of women applicants or Black applicants in the pool could then change whether our applicants are viewed higher or lower down on the list. And I guess, yeah, our main thought is that because everything has been randomly assigned, we don't expect that there would be, we expect that those effects would be averaged out across the study, but I think that it's a really important question to try to tease apart some of those applicant pool effects as well. Yeah, it's something that I hope to get to, but haven't quite yet. So it's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions before I ask mine? Oh, Ellie, go ahead.
Yeah, can following up on that, do you have any information on the employers themselves? I mean, I know you randomly selected, but do you have information on attributes of the employers that you could also use to explain some of the callback rates, to link to Daniela's earlier question?
That's a great question. And that is, so when I mentioned the burning glass data to link with skills, that's another reason to link is to get some more information on employers. Particularly, are they large or small? How many job listings do they have? Are they hiring a lot? Those types of questions. And so those are, we were hoping it would be a simple matching process to get those data, but it is not. And so, but that's those are the type of metrics that we can look at. We could also look at things like the salary by company and employer. So, for example, are people paying higher? Is this maybe potentially an in-demand job where we would expect a lot of applicants to that type of job because they have a high salary, and those types of questions as well. But currently we do not have, we have the company name and the location, but we don't have any additional details on what the company culture is like, what the company size is. And yeah, I think that those are really important questions too.
I'm going to ask a question that's sort of linked to what Daniela had asked earlier, but also to your point, Kate, you said that, at the end that this is especially important in a context of instability and stuff. And I wanted to ask about that is, how do you think the kind of broader economic context matters for this, right? Because we know from Sarah Thibault's work that discrimination gets amplified, for instance, with the women not getting VC money or whatever during times of kind of economic downturn and so on, right? So do you think this is a context that kind of holds stable, or basically how are you guys thinking about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so this study that we fielded in 2019, we continued through 2020 on the senior accountants. So we do actually have some data on how the callbacks have changed, pre and during pandemic. And basically, there's kind of a couple of moving parts because all these things have happened all at once. Like the businesses closing and collapse of certain economies, and so a lot fewer jobs being available in the first place. Then we have these processes where there are different effects for who is leaving the labor market. For example, women, especially mothers, are especially white mothers, are leaving work to care for their children because children are in remote schooling and those types of things. And then on top of it, we have in the summer the Black Lives Matter protests that happened that could have affected racial discrimination processes, because we saw a lot of companies kind of paying increased attention to racism and recognizing racism in their companies and in their hiring processes. So we do have a small paper that's trying to tease apart some of these macro kind of shocks, I guess, in how that affects discrimination and callbacks. And you're absolutely right. I think that there's ongoing research that shows that when economies collapse, when there's like less job demand, there's less availability of resources to spread around, then there are unequal impacts of who is able to secure those resources. So that prediction related to the supply of jobs or the demand of jobs shrinking, we would expect that discrimination would increase, right, during the pandemic. But we think that there's a counter hypothesis, which is that because women and white women especially have left the labor market, there could be preferences for women when those people are applying to jobs, because of this idea that for example, if somebody left work and you're trying to hire a replacement for that person, they might be using gender as kind of a proxy of, okay, this woman used to be in this position and now I want to hire someone similar to that person. Who's going to be similar to that person and do that job similarly? Oh, another woman. So they might be kind of using gender in that way to potentially decrease discrimination toward women. And then, like I mentioned, the Black Lives Matter protests could also be reducing racial discrimination. So we have this paper that's kind of a pre-during, I guess, analysis. And what we're finding is that discrimination against Black men has been a pretty much stable during this time, so no real changes. And discrimination against women, both Black women and white women, has decreased. And actually, white women are now, in our accountant sample during the 2020 and 2021 time period, are preferred over white men. So we actually see this like preference. So when white women used to be slightly disadvantaged, now they're preferred. Black women used to be highly disadvantaged, and now they don't face discrimination in our sample. So we think that connects more clearly to the supply side explanation of women leaving the labor force and then employers using gender as a proxy. But it is really hard to tease apart some of these different effects and, like was mentioned earlier, different labor dynamics at the local level as well. So we're kind of trying to work through that.
Just linking to that, if I can just follow up, in the Jan 2020 survey, you said that the Black women, for instance, there was no they basically escaped stereotyping, right? So what are some things that you're thinking about what's happening there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So one possibility is that we might have just not asked the right questions, and so we've been thinking about some of these common gender and racial stereotypes around commitment, around leadership and reliability. It's possible that we, missed some dimensions that would be specifically applicable to Black women. And for those types of dimensions, thinking about some of the social psychological research on Black women being stereotyped as dominant or like overly assertive or something like that. So that's one possibility. And I guess the other one is kind of relating back to those theories of prototypicality, in that, potentially there are ways for some, along some dimensions, for Black women to escape some of these common gender or racial stereotypes, or and so we don't think that this means that they're necessarily being viewed as the same as white men, or that there's like, nothing going on there with respect to gender and race, but just that along the dimensions that we asked about, that they seem to escape some of these stereotypes. But yeah, I think that's a great question.
So other questions?
I have one. Hi, is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you for that great talk. I actually have two. One is more substantive and the other one is kind of more practical or down to earth. The more substantive one is about how you signal soft skills on a CV and what credibility that statement may have for the employer, because the literature that I have read about matching is mostly the Lauren Rivera's text about cultural matching. And in that case, as far as I remember, she bases her analysis on interviewing, where soft skills are far more apparent, right? Because it's one thing to write on your CV that you're a great leader, and it's a very different thing to perform that in front of an interviewer. So that is my first question, is how do you assess that, and how do you validate the interpretation of those soft skills by the employers? And the second one, the more practical one, is what do you respond when you get a callback on a fictitious application?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer that second one first. So we respond, thank you for the interview request, but we found another job, and so we're no longer interested, no longer available. Basically, the idea is to minimize any time that the employers, additionally spend on trying to contact these fake people. And this is, guided by the IRB and their recommendations. And so, yeah, we do have a team of, undergraduate researchers who are checking these email accounts and responding to them and recording callbacks. So in terms of the soft skill validation and, credibility on the CV, I think this is a really important question. And we, initially thought that soft skills would not have any impact. So, I think later on we came to read more of the literature on, the importance of soft skills, especially for women and racial minorities. But, I think going into the study without having done as much of that literature reading, we kind of, what you mentioned, thought that like, if you list leadership on a resume, there's no way for a person to know that you actually have, you just put that on your resume, and how is that, going to be validated or viewed as an employer? Similarly, if you say like, oh, I'm a team player or something, who knows if you're a team player? You haven't actually had any interactions with the person. So we were kind of thinking about, technical skills are so easy to see and to, assume that they wouldn't put that skill on their resume if they didn't actually have it, compared to soft skills where maybe people have these questions about whether it's a real soft skill. So we were, then thinking about these different types of soft skills as well. So thinking about leadership versus, for example, analytical skills, and what types of skills are assumed to be had by gender. Like, so would an employer assume that women are helpful and warm, and then it doesn't matter if they put those skills on the resume? Or, is there something that if you don't put those skills on the resume, then you're symbolizing something in the lack of putting those skills? Yeah, so it's a really important question. I think that I don't have a satisfying answer, in that we are still kind of thinking through this, and I think we need more information to better validate how employers are viewing resumes and thinking about soft skills. What I will say is that initially we were wondering, is it just the matching effect on soft skills? Is it also a job requirement effect? So if you think about matching, you have to have the job requiring soft skills in order to have a match on it. So like a low match could be because the job doesn't require any soft skills, or it could be that they require different soft skills than the person matches on. And we don't really see that that's happening. So it doesn't seem that it's just, so for example, if you look at the number of unmatched soft skills, there's not the same effect going on. So it doesn't just seem like it's a matter of how many skills the job is requiring. It does seem like there's something happening clearly with matching on them. And maybe it's just a simple story of employers saying, okay, we need someone who is a leader, we need someone who's analytical, and then they go through the resume, oh, this person checks those boxes. And it's just kind of this quick, process there. But I think you're absolutely right. This is an important question that we don't kind of fully know the answer to.
I know there's another question, but can I do a follow-up to that? Because I was also finding the soft skills really surprising, because I also saw it as just filler. I wonder if there's a less direct reading of sort of signaling going on with the soft skills. So it could either be that it's just generally demonstrating like eagerness and actually something about personality. If you're giving voice to, these sets of soft skills, you're showing, like, I really want this job and whatever else. But the other one is, if it's really the matching here, then maybe it's actually suggesting what would be interpreted as a closer reading of the job ad. That for you to be able to say leadership, and it says leadership in there, for you to be able to say your commitment to detail, and those are the things that might seem more extraneous. So it actually would imply that you've more closely read the actual details of the job listing, and so therefore are a more, again, sort of a more eager candidate thanks to that. That was my hypothesized interpretation. I wonder if that seems to have any credence to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And we do randomize the number of, so for your first point about, is it just signaling, having these skills, does that signal eagerness or something like that, compared to not having them? We do randomize the number of soft skills on the resume, but the range isn't huge there. So, and we're not seeing much going on there. But again, we don't have resumes that are sending 0 soft skills out. So potentially that's something that could be looked at further. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It could just be simply, closer reading of the job ad. But it's interesting that the soft skills have that effect compared to the technical skills, right? So if you are closely reading those technical skills and making sure you have all of those, then that doesn't seem to have an effect, but the soft skills do. So I think you're right that this is important to really figure out, because it does change the story, what's going on from the employer's perspective. But I think that's a really good idea in terms of, is it just a close reading of the job ad? And it reminds me a little bit of, there's a paper in economics about attention discrimination in terms of like how employers or any evaluators, if they look at different job or different types of markets, what pieces of information do they pay attention to when they're scanning resumes? And they have this argument about when are people spending more time on racial minority applicants compared to when they're spending less time. So I think that that's also related to maybe they're spending more, this person really clearly matched on all these skills, and so let's dig in and spend more time on this resume. That's an interesting point.
Guodong, I think you had a question.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate for this very great lecture, especially because my research proposal will plan to include an audit study. And one of my questions is just a follow up from the last second question. After you have contact with employers, after you have got their feedbacks, callbacks, and what if we just don't say, we just have another position, we just want to leave you, but instead we talk to them about our study. Can we, by doing that, can we then follow up with a so-called interview? I mean, by doing an interview, you may get much subtle details and may find more results. Yeah, that's just a very primary thinking, but that's after I have got some primary backgrounds. I want to plan for my following studies. I just try to ask you about this question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting question. So we are not able to contact the, so per my IRB here at UNC was very suspicious of doing any type of field experiment or audit study. And so the conditions there were, very limited in that we could only respond to say, no, we're no longer interested. We cannot, save their contact information. For example, we can't follow up with these specific people to interview. I think that is a really interesting study design, though, idea in terms of, informing people that they were a part of the study potentially, and asking for more, asking for the ability to connect to get more details over their kind of thought processes. I know that David Padula, who's at Harvard and does these audit studies, I know he has this big ongoing study where he did something similar in that he sent out 4 resumes to each employer, then contacted the employer and said, could you be part of a survey? And so he's doing this kind of survey after the fact analysis that he can then connect to discrimination levels. And I think the survey is around like the organizational context of discrimination. So, what hiring practices do you have? Who screens your resumes? What is the composition of your hiring managers according to gender and race, like those type of things, as well as kind of those company size and other kind of moderating variables as well. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea, and I wish that I was able to do anything. I feel very limited. It's interesting to think about how the IRBs respond to these types of studies, because there is ethical concerns. Yeah,
because the ethical problem is one of the main concerns that I in current situation mainly confused me, and I think I need to think more about. And maybe another question is, when you have shown us with a very significant trend for when a Black man have a higher soft skills, then his callback rate will increase dramatically. I wonder if that may be due to some sample selection bias, because maybe some companies, if they want to hire more Black men, then they maybe when the Black men just fill in with their requirements, then they will just much more tend to call back for that. I wonder if you have controlled for some potential confounders or some other measurements.
Yeah, could you say more about what other control measures?
Yeah, maybe. I also just got some very primary thinkings, but I think maybe, for instance, some companies level categories. Of course, you just have one category, but maybe for companies' background or other kind of their skills or something.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a good point. We do not have a lot of additional control measures, but I think it's interesting to think about specifically how, like, I think your question makes me think about how employers are viewing Black men applicants in this occupation specifically, because accountants again have slightly more women than men, but then there isn't too much racial diversity in this profession, and so I think there's some questions around how many Black men applicants are they even receiving, right? Do they how do they view this as like one among many, or is it really just, oh, this is the only Black man who's applied for this job, that type of thing. So I think that there's a lot more to be done around thinking about the relationship between applicant pools and perceptions of these different types of applicants. But yeah, we don't have any additional control variables to use beyond, for example, at the company measure or anything like that beyond. We just have these applicant controls and then region and stuff like that. But it's a good point.
Yeah. Really kind response. Thank you so much. It's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question just following on Jacinto's about the practicalities, and I mean, the application process here looks like submitting a resume, right? But is that really how the application process works? Because often you have to like fill out forms or write like a cover letter or like do other things. So how did you guys like deal with that, and if you encountered that at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're absolutely right. So, submitting a resume is the bare minimum, but most of them require, cover letter, all of this information. And so the way we dealt with that is we do have cover letters that correspond with the, they have similar language that's all randomized, but it mentions, their university, their years of experience, those types of things. So we use those cover letters, and we basically have a kind of guiding principles for how to answer questions for all applicants. So, for example, if they say, how many years of experience do you have for this skill or something like that, we have this kind of set of guidelines so that we're consistent across all of the applications. What we do, however, though, is if there's a couple questions we can't answer. So, for example, if they say you need to list a referral, we really can't do that because I don't know who they would call me. So it doesn't really work, and so we just end up skipping those applications. Similarly, if they have like a very long open-ended kind of, describe the last time you encountered, I don't know, a problem in your workplace or something like that, we tend to skip those applications, in part because practically they just take a long time and it doesn't make a lot of sense to focus our time there, but also just because that could introduce a lot of more, variation and noise that we can't control. But yeah, I think that's a great question.
Any other questions for Kate? Okay, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the talk. I was thinking with the skills, you have a lot of permutations of different people because of the soft skills of the education, the schools they went to, and so on. So there are zillions of potential CVs that you could generate from this. And then, your sample size is a couple of thousand, but did you check for those groups that you were most interested in, like gender and ethnicity combinations? Did you check how balanced the covariates were? So did you have really very balanced soft skills in certain subgroups that you are interested in relative to others? And then linked to this, when you try to predict it with your logistic regression, could you maybe put a lot of these variables in something more flexible, like a tree or something, and try to predict that as well to see whether it's something beyond the interaction you put into the logistic regressions? But I don't know whether that's of any interest to what you're doing. Yeah. Okay. Particularly the first question I was wondering about.
Yeah, that's a great question. We have looked at how balanced these different randomization treatments are across gender and race, and they are balanced. So we have about 7,000 applications. So you're absolutely right that there are a lot of different combinations, but on expectation they should average out. And so we do find that there's no significant differences in, for example, like education or soft skills across these different groups. And we also don't find evidence of interaction effect. So for example, by like the university or having a specific soft skill, there's no significant interactions by gender and race for these like individual applicant characteristics. But I think you're right, it's always a concern that, maybe we can't detect an interaction effect, or maybe it's some combination of effects that's going on there. I will say that on average, the resumes don't differ dramatically, right? So a different way of doing this type of study would just have two templates, for example, and those are nearly identical except for a couple of things. You randomize who's assigned to what template, but you're not randomizing any additional characteristics. On average, we don't really have people who are dramatically inexperienced or dramatically overqualified or something like that. So they do even out to be pretty similar. But in terms of a more flexible model, we haven't looked into that yet, but I think that's a really interesting idea. Did you have any, and I'm not that experienced in those, in doing any of these tree models or anything.
Yeah, it goes into the direction that we were saying. It would, in the end, it would be kind of a balance test to see how balanced your covariates are. If you can predict certain groups with certain covariate combinations, then it seems that that your sample wasn't large enough to have these averaging effects. So that kind of was the idea I had, but it's also not so much my kind of field. So it was just a thing I thought about, because like you say, there are so many, if I don't know, with all the soft skills you had, maybe 1 or 2 of them matter a lot. And then just by pure chance, if the sample isn't huge, you have these kind of disproportionately in certain groups, or I don't know. And particularly if you look at so many different kind of subgroups, but yeah, but like I think you answered the question. You said there weren't any big differences. That was kind of what I was wondering about.
Yeah, but I really appreciate the suggestion to try to be more formalized about how we specify different combinations and look at the balance that way. Yeah, thank you.
So I just want to check if there's any last questions for Kate. So Kate, I'd like to thank you again so much for coming. This was a really great talk, and we just really enjoyed hearing you tell us about your research. Just a plug for people who are still here. Next week, we have Dean Phelan coming to talk about social inequalities in citations in social science disciplines, especially communications. That's a case study, also from UNC.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the questions. They are giving me a lot to think about, and it was really fun to talk to you all today.